Welcome to Friday Afternoon in the Manor Speaker Series, live with Dr. JJ. We have a great person lined up today, a good friend who we met. We just said, hello, would you like to talk? And then 11 hours later, we're still having dinner together. It's wonderful. And to welcome our wonderful speaker I've not named yet will be our illustrious Susan Johnson. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, John Joseph. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. We welcome Fredelle Brief, who shares Passover stories to remember. Everyone has stories about the holidays that they celebrate, and I'm certainly looking forward to hear hers.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, John Joseph, for that very kind introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the holiday of Passover with you today. I'm a Jewish woman. I've been active in my own community and interfaith dialogue all my life. When I worked as the director of multi-faith programming for Vision TV, I often encountered statements like, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. It was important for people to let me know this. The late Jonathan Sacks said in his book, Celebrating Life, that spirituality is the poetry of the soul. Religion is the prose. Spirituality is the direct encounter with God. Religion is the behavior we adopt when we express ourselves as belonging to a group who at a key point in history encountered the divine. You can be spiritual and not religious, and you can be religious and not spiritual. It is almost like the distinction between love and marriage. Love is an emotion. Marriage is an institution. They are linked, but they are not the same. What Rabbi Sacks does here is explain the difference between spirituality and religion by comparing it to the difference between love and marriage. And with this insight, he gifted us a key to open the door towards explaining and connecting religion and spirituality. Now that I've shared this insight with you, I'd like to share with you that I strive to include as much spirituality in Passover, but I think that the difference in Passover, it's probably 75% religion, that's the ritual, and about 25% spirituality, meaning for the 75%, I'm thinking about and performing my duties and obligations, like cleaning the house and buying kosher for Passover food and doing what needs to be done on Seder night. And about the other quarter of my time is focused on feelings and inspiration, such as gratefulness to God for freedom and connecting with God in the commandments we perform. When you think of your celebrations of Christmas, how much of your celebration is focused on spirituality and how much of it might be focused on ritual? We all have different answers and different percentages. I've been observing Passover with my family my whole life, and I brought a photo. Can you find the photo? Yes. And I brought a photo with me of my very first Passover. I want to get it closer. I'm the baby on your right-hand side sitting on a man's lap. And there are many babies in the family at that time. It's remarkable that all the men got leave from the armed forces to come home that year because they all had new babies. What is Passover, you may ask? Well, the Jews have 3 pilgrimage festivals each year that brought them to Jerusalem. Passover is one of those festivals. Getting to Jerusalem was no easy feat at that time. People had to walk to Jerusalem with their camping supplies, because sometimes you had to sleep overnight at the side of the road, and a lamb to sacrifice for the festival. Most of the people worked the land, so that it was a very challenging time to go in the spring when the crops were newly planted. When we gather our families now, we do a ritual at home called the Seder. That word means the order. These rituals are, instead of religious services, they are religious services. Since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, we've been celebrating the three pilgrimage festivals at our homes. When we perform these services, we use a prayer book called the Haggadah, or the other name for the Haggadah is the story. And it's written in Hebrew, and ours has English translation. If you lived in Holland, it would have Dutch translation. We start the ritual by blessing the wine. Next, we wash our hands, and next, the ritual leader breaks the first piece of matzah. The leader hides the piece of matzah in an accessible place for the children to find and to be rewarded for their success. Oh dear, some things that my wine glasses have fallen down, but my husband's going to give me one piece of matzah if he can. Thank you. Now this is matzah. It's not really the most delicious thing you ever ate. In fact, you have to put jam on it or butter to make it even tasty. But this is matzah. We gather together as a family to tell the story because that's a commandment from God. The current Hebrew form of the Haggadah that we use was codified after the development of the printing press, which would be about the 15th century. So to sum up, in the spring of every single year, Jewish people gather together in their homes for the ritual of telling the story of our coming out of Egypt, where we had been slaves to Pharaoh. We tell the story with a sense of immediacy, so we feel it was us, this generation, that came out of Egypt. So if you wondered what Jesus was doing in Jerusalem at that time, he was a Jew like me, and he was celebrating Passover. Families celebrate the Seder by making a kind of drama in telling the story. The leader of the drama picks up the matzah and says, "This is the bread of our affliction, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come and celebrate Passover with us. Now we are here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves to Pharaoh. Next year, may we be free." Get ready for a story, the leader tells us. One of the children starts the ritual discussion by asking 4 questions. I'm going to pass that back. The child looks around at the table and notices that this meal is unique. It's unusual. So her first question is, why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights, we eat either leavened bread or unleavened bread. On this night, we only eat unleavened bread. Bread was a central part of every meal in biblical times. Her second question is, on this night, we eat herbs of any kind. On this night, we only eat bitter herbs. It would be useful to note that our eating habits today are different than they were, say, 2,000 years ago. At that time, we would put herbs on the table as condiments for our food. For example, we would put parsley or mint leaves or rosemary in bowls to eat with the meat, instead of ketchup or mustard that we use now. But on this night, we use only a bitter herb like endive, which is bitter and spicy. Her third question is, on all other nights, we do not dip our herbs even once. On this night, we dip them twice. We use salt water as the dip to remind us of our tears of suffering. And our fourth and final question is, on all other nights, we eat our meals in any manner. On this night, why do we sit around the table in a reclining, relaxed position? Now, in the time of the Bible, rich and powerful people reclined on couches to eat their meals. They were sort of like the chairs you have beside a swimming pool where your feet are stretched out before you. Servants presented their food and wine in courses. In these times, we would ask all our guests, so I would ask all the children and all the adults to bring a pillow from their beds to put on the seat so they'll be extra comfortable on the night of the Passover Seder. The little kids loved this and sometimes fell asleep partway through the meal. I remember falling asleep during a Seder. We had little glasses of wine. Everybody gets little glasses because you have to drink 4 glasses of wine for blessings during the ceremony. So the little kids who were about 4 years old, the kids you saw as babies, those kids were sitting at a card table at the end of the table. And we had these little glasses of wine. So we decided to follow the adults and drink the wine whole glasses. So we had 2 glasses of wine and we all fell asleep. And we gathered in sort of a floppy mob under the table sleeping, and we missed the whole story. So our parents joked about that and asked us to take only sips of wine after that. So now you know one of my family secrets. The leader then uncovers the matzah and begins to reply to the children's questions, those 4 questions. We hear the story of God leading us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. There's no mention of Moses in this story. We learn about a direct relationship between God and the Jewish people. Our exodus from Egypt began with a series of miracles performed by God in Egypt and during our escape, all on our behalf. The next part of telling describes how our sages told this story about 2,000 years ago. The section with the sages ends with some very good advice to contemporary storytellers. So if you're a storyteller, you'll find this useful. To the wise son who asks, what is the meaning of all these laws and customs which God commanded of us? To him, you should explain everything down to the last detail. To the contrary son, sometimes called the wicked son, who asks, what is the meaning of this service to you? Saying you, he excludes himself from the group. He denies a basic principle. Your answer should be, this is because of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt, for me and not for him, because if he had been there, he would not have been redeemed. The basic principle referred to is that each of us who was redeemed believed we were part of the Jewish community. The simple son asks, what is this? To him you should say, with a strong hand, God brought us out of Egypt from the house of bondage. And if you have a son who does not even know how to ask a question, you must begin for him and tell him, this is done because of what God did for me when he brought me out of Egypt. One of my kids, who's a physicist now, can explain her work to anybody who asks, whether it's her elderly great aunt or a colleague in her lab. Talking to the person in front of you is a very important communication skill. We learn in the Passover Seder that we all belong around this table. We all have something to learn from the experience, no matter how we understand this story of redemption now. In the next part of telling this story, we learn some history of the Jewish people prior to Egypt, even prior to becoming a people. It says, long ago, our ancestors worshipped idols. Abraham, who will be familiar to you as well from the Bible, our forefather understood there's only one God. Abraham, his son Isaac, and grandson Jacob were promised by God that they and their descendants would develop into a great nation, and the land of Canaan, where they were living, was intended by God to be our homeland. When Jacob and his family went down to Egypt to escape the drought at home, the Jews were only 70 people. We were thousands when we escaped from Egypt a couple of hundred years later. We became a great nation in Egypt, but we were also Pharaoh's slaves. And the Eternal, this is a quote, and the Eternal brought us forth from Egypt, not by a ministering angel, not by a fiery angel, not by a messenger, but by himself. Moses acted on God's behalf as he was instructed by God, but it was only God who redeemed us from Egypt. Pharaoh did not want us, the slaves, to leave Egypt. We read about in the Bible about God creating 10 plagues to convince the Pharaoh. The first was blood, then frogs, then vermin, beasts, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the toughest one, the slaying of the firstborn. And these plagues occurred throughout Egypt. When we recite the nature of each plague, our ritual at the Seder table, is that we dip our little finger into our glass of wine, one each time we say a plague, and then and we keep taking little fingers of wine out of our glass. This is a symbol of reducing our joy in telling this story. Others suffered because Pharaoh would not let us leave Egypt. So we can't be fully joyful if others suffered. We know our kids are really growing up when they ask us why we dip our fingers in the wine and flick the wine on a plate. We tell this story while we're sitting around the dinner table. When we prepare the table for this ritual, we place the symbols of the meal in the center of the table. And now the plastic plate. So this plate with the word Pesach on top, it's written in Hebrew. And I just want to show you how colorful it is. It's in the middle of the table as a teaching tool. The burnt bone represents the Passover ritual involving the lamb. The matzah represents the tasteless bread that we ate as slaves. The bitter herbs represents our emotion, stuck in slavery with no choices. We left Egypt quickly, and there was no time for the bread to rise. It baked on our backs as we fled Egypt. You see that there are places for other foods like hard-boiled eggs, which reminds us of spring renewal, vegetables for dipping into salt water to remind us it's the salt water that reminds us of our tears while we were slaves. I'm not sure why haroset, which is a delicious mixture of apples, nuts, and wine chopped up together, are also on the plate. Maybe it was a mom's addition to sweeten the experience. We eat them too, but I'm not sure why. Sometimes we say it was mortar, the mortar that we had to use to put the bricks together while we were building for Pharaoh. In every generation, we should regard our leaving Egypt as slaves and becoming free people through the leadership and miracles of God who intervened in our history and on our behalf. So it wasn't the slaves back in history that left Egypt, it was me, my husband, and my children. God saved me. We sing songs of praise to God, mostly psalms, blessings, and then drink the second cup of wine, wash our hands again, bless the matzah and bitter herbs, and then we eat a huge supper together. I'm going to give both these things to you. I'm really lucky to have a prop man with me today.
He's your man.
I appreciate it. After the meal ends, we say grace after the meal. Jewish people say grace twice. Once before you eat the food, and then afterwards when you're sated, and you thank God for sating you, for giving you enough food to eat. We drink 2 more ritual cups of wine. We sing songs of praise to God. We finally sing repetitious songs that engage the children, who then go to bed happily. The first is that, but there are 2 customs that follow the meal. They aren't before the meal. The first is offering a cup of wine to Elijah the prophet and singing welcome to him. He's supposed to announce the coming of the Messiah or messenger from God. The second is that we lift forth a cup of wine with this blessing. It ends the service. Next year in Jerusalem, I think the people who live in Jerusalem now must say next year as well in Jerusalem. When we lived in Israel in the time of the Bible, our faith was centralized in Jerusalem. All the Passover sacrifices and daily sacrifices took place at the Jerusalem temple. Since the second temple was destroyed by the Romans and most of us were sent away in exile, our focus has been on prayer, and the focus in prayer has also been on returning to Jerusalem. Judaism is not practiced with sacrifices anymore, but with daily prayer and blessings. But every spring, we remember the longing of the Jewish people for freedom and God's response by leading us to redemption. That's how the Passover festival starts. Most of us start planning and cleaning up our homes about 1 month before the festival. We know we'll be eating a much more restricted diet, so we clean out all the other food from our cupboards and replace it with Passover foods. We visit each other in non-COVID times and think of the meaning of freedom. It's a really happy holiday. The work of making Passover at home is considerable. So I'd like to say preparing for the rituals takes a lot of time and energy. But the image of God, who loves us all and personally takes us to freedom when we're slaves in Egypt, moves me tremendously every year. God interfered in history on our behalf. I think that God is active in history now and is still seeking partners in changing the world to be a place and a reflection of God's caring and God's love for each and all of us. Thank you. And I'm willing to answer any questions.
Perfect. I figured out a way to do this. I will just use this one. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. So I see a couple of people. I think there's Gary Coates there and Amir. Okay. Where's actually first? Gary, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. Oh, we've got others. This is the first time the Seder has been explained to me so I can understand it.
Thank you.
Many years ago, John Joseph prepared a Seder meal at Met, and we all participated, but we had to exclude the wine, unfortunately. So it was a great beginning to the information about Seder. John Joseph did a wonderful job, and now I understand it more clearly after your report. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So I have a big question I would have for Fredelle. So if you think of the Seder, as you mentioned, with regards to when the temple fell and people started celebrating at home.
Yes.
So keeping in mind that there were Jewish people living all over not only the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the question I would ask of you, I would assume that not everybody could make it to Jerusalem. So that being said, had the tradition of a non-temple experience developed before the temple fell?
Yes, it did, John Joseph. I didn't mention to you, it was mostly men who went to Jerusalem,
Okay.
mostly men who had the responsibility of doing ritual and not women. So the women at home had to carry on Seders. And when the men couldn't go to Jerusalem, and they certainly couldn't go every year, it was a very difficult thing to do. When they got to Jerusalem, the priest assigned the lamb. Not one person could eat a lamb, but maybe other people in your village could join you in eating the lamb. So there was a lot going on. And that's why at the beginning we say, let everyone come and eat with me. Let us share this story and our food with you. And people didn't have the printing press. So we would write out the Seder ritual. And from generation to generation, you either inherited it or you copied it from your family. So when the printing press came, I don't know what people did in terms of prayer when they were Christians at that time. But if you didn't have it written down, you either had to follow the ritual leader or you were in trouble. So we made sure we wrote it all down so that we could do it like it was supposed to be done.
Well, a good question. So I think probably it was probably more of an oral tradition because not everybody could
Yes.
afford a script,
Yes.
so to speak. And Susan, do you have a question? I think you have that. You have that look like a question. Here we go.
Also, don't forget, not everybody could read, so.
Exactly. Oral tradition.
Yes.
I'm always looking for parallels and things, always looking for common ground. And the description of the Seder meal to me is so much like communion.
Yes.
It's like with the blood,
Right.
bread and the wine, and it's following. So yes, it's, I've never seen it in quite that light before, just how much there is in common.
Yes.
And I think that's what we need to focus on. I mean, just because you use this glass rather than that one, or this bread rather than that, it's the same meaning.
Yes.
So I think
Yes.
that's wonderful. Thank you for explaining this so clearly to us.
Thank you. I have a question for you.
Oh, yes.
I mentioned at the beginning that most of us involve ourselves both in ritual and spirituality.
Mhm.
I try to link them together.
Yes.
For Christmas for you, how much of it is ritual in your mind, and how much of it is your love, your spirituality that has nothing to do with ritual?
It's a good question. I mean, the church I grew up in as a child was very much about ritual. And so Advent and that had a special meaning for us. But for me, it should be available to everybody. And if you keep it just to this, then you're excluding people. And, you know, it's, yes, it is the birth of Christ, but it is also a time of rejoicing. It's, in fact, the early missionaries borrowed heavily from the pagans with their celebrations, merging the two into the Christmas we know now. And then, of course, Coca-Cola came in and gave us Santa Claus. And it's, I would like it to go back to being a time of rejoicing rather than some obscene decathlon where you're trying to spend all your money and run yourself ragged and try to contact people you've never heard of for 2 years.
Oh, God.
So it's, commercialism is partly to blame, but, you know, us as well to follow and say, no, wait a minute, instead of saying, wait a minute,
Yes.
you know.
So you think it should have a deeper spiritual life?
Well, we caught the Grinch for this, you know, came without packages, boxes and bags. Yeah, it's Christmas, no matter what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
So to respond to some of that, it's interesting. So two periods of history in the 1600s in England.
Yes.
The Puritans, terrible people. Anyway, they outlawed Christmas because they
What?
well, you know, you got to trust. Some cultures think they can do certain things. There were periods. You have to place it in context. After King Henry decided to go to take a left turn at the Greenwich Village and leave the Catholic Church, a few decades later, the Puritans departed from the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. This is part of the whole reform movement. But they were so strict, not only did they kill the king, they created their own government, and they created England's, in sort of a way, it became a republic, and they outlawed Christmas for about 40 years. And so what happened was the restoration of monarchy. But then, flash forward 1800s, if you recall Charles Dickens,
Yes.
Christmas had become almost forgotten. This was a law
Wow.
and tradition. So people were even working on Christmas Day. And so what he did by creating the story of a Christmas Carol, he reminded people, maybe not even so much all the ritual, but the core meaning
Yes.
of what it is, about caring for people more than yourself, of
Yes.
love.
Very
again.
interesting.
And he restored the tradition of Christmas, not gift buying, you know,
Yes.
but you flash forward. So the question I could ask when you talk about ritual. So then why have this Christmas tradition has expounded to now we have Hanukkah bushes and people are giving gifts and we have Diwali, doing Diwali presents.
Yes.
So here's a question. Has the ritual become, I'm not going to use the word corrupted, but taken a detour because this whole bigger Christmas tradition has become the machine driving it forward versus the spiritual idea of caring for each other?
John Joseph, that's a very deep question. And I'm glad you asked it.
You stirred it up,
Yes.
you're the catalyst.
But I'm really glad you asked it because I think it's linked in many ways to our fallen sense of wonder.
Yes.
When you were a little kid and I was a little kid and Harold was a little kid and everybody in this room was a little kid, you would look out at the night sky and go, oh, you'd see all those stars and you had no idea how far away they were or what they meant, but you had a sense of wonder. And when you went out on a summer day and saw the butterflies and the other insects that were fairly close to you, you had a sense of wonder. Even seeing the ants leaving trails, all of it was something you'd never seen before. And I feel that the spiritual part of my religion, and probably yours as well, needs to be reinvested with wonder. We don't have all the answers, but we can have the wonder. We can have the wonder about the nature of God. We can have the wonder about how to feel God's love and how to share that love with other people. But unless we have a sense of wonder, we can't have a sense of engagement. And that, for me, gets rid of the importance of physical presence. You need those, I think, for little kids. I think, like we have all these games we play with the kids at the table to keep them interested in a story that's hard to understand for little kids. But as you grow up, your sense of wonder is taken from you. Your sense of expertise in life is taken from you. You could be a dentist, but what do you know about how to get rid of garbage? And we don't think you know anything about it. And that's the problem. We're all in these compartments. So that's another issue. But if you allow your sense of wonder to stay with you to your old age, to your very oldest age, your life will never be boring, ever. So I tried.
I love that. That's great. So I should share with you another piece of good news. So it was the week before last, we had our youth at the manor, and we celebrated Seder,
Yes.
using a Seder created by my good friend Mark Stevenson Jackman, who's a
Yes.
reconstructed Jewish person.
Yes.
And it was amazing because we came into the room and it was all lit with candles. And right away, the young person said, wow. And we were sitting on the floor. They knew we were in for something different.
Yes.
And as we read to the Seder, we had the egg and the herbs and the basil sauce.
Yeah.
They were plugged right in. And you
Yeah.
see, so that's where, to me, the ritual is the bridge to the spiritual,
Ah.
right? As opposed to, I see the two connected.
Oh, I think so too.
Because the ritual can become empty, yes, of course.
Yes.
But if you're saying the words from your heart, like I can see you do, and it's very spiritual. But if it's just da 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 da, right?
Yes. Yes. And
So-
it's not engaging.
Yes. So is there anybody else? Any other questions? Now I see Amir. Any questions from your corner, Amir? No, yes, no, maybe no. Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for plugging in. So yeah.
Yeah.
So, now, Fredelle, do you have any sort of closing words you might want to take us forward? But next, if we do this again, we could go. You used to come to I have a picture of you, the one at Metropolitan.
Yes.
You have any closing words?
It's been a real honor to talk to you today about a holiday that I celebrate. And it gives me a sense of connection with you. If I have shared something about why it's exciting and meaningful to me to be a Jew, then that is terrific. And it's so good to see you today. Thank you for inviting me, John Joseph.
Thank you, Fredelle. It's very surreal that you're talking about the Seder with the cross behind you as a backdrop. Your friends are going to say, Fredelle, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Oh my God.
I have a Jewish star in my
There you
chest.
go, the Palm Sundays in the background.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I think Susan wants to come over. Just also in closing, that I think I told you years ago about the great moment for me when I was celebrating Rosh Hashanah with my friend Stuart Ross, and he was referencing the bread and the wine, just like Susan talked about. And I said, "This is communion." When did we ever think that we invented this? But of course, it takes sometimes 2,000 years to go, aha.
Yeah, well, Jesus was Jewish, like
Exactly.
me.
Yeah,
You would know that.
we're working on that one.
All right.
Over to-
Just a last thought on the Christmas thing. It's funny now, the change in the verb tense, the Christmas is coming, the kids say, "Oh, I get to do this and this." And the adults go, "I've got to do this and this." So, but thank you all for coming today. We won't have anything next week because of being Good Friday. Welcome to come to the morning service if you like. And the week after, we will have Dorothy Danbrook, who will be walking us through the spring labyrinth.
Oh, how nice. That's great.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.